Greetings, welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinar series. We're already in September. Wow, that's crazy, isn't it? The year just flies. So the session today is on the thematic, I guess we've been running some theme, generative AI and assessment, with focusing on authenticity and feedback. And this session is joint with the Assessment and Higher Education Network, and we'll have two presenters, Mathilde and Katie, featured today. Fabio, would you like to do the introduction to the AHE, please?
Certainly, Matthew, thanks. So as Matthew mentioned, we are co-hosting this session, and we are really thankful to Matthew and the Transforming Assessment Network for having us. This is a partnership that has been going on for a few years and has been very productive. We have opportunity to expand our respective networks. So we are based in the UK, and you got two of us today in the room. You got James Wood from the University of Bangor, and then you got myself from the University of East Anglia. We are both members of the Assessment in Higher Education Conference Committee. So Assessment in Higher Education is an independent network, and we are interested in anything related to assessment and feedback, both from a theoretical and a practice perspective. And every year we run, along with the seminars and other events, an annual conference which is taking place in Manchester. So the next conference from the Assessment and Higher Education Network will be on the 19th and 20th of June in Manchester, and the call for papers will open on October 2024. You can find us at the address that I set up there. The slides are going to be available later so that you can fetch it. But of course, Google is gonna point you in the right direction. I will modestly say it's one of the best conferences in assessment here in Europe. So please consider to join us. So for today, we have lined up two speakers. They are both from the UK. We got Mathilde and Kathleen. And we are going to start off with Mathilde. It's going to be a 15 minutes presentation, plus possibly 5 minutes if there are any burning questions. And Katie's going to follow immediately after, and we are going to have discussion at the end. So, Mathilde, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. So I hope you can hear me well. So this presentation is looking at enhancing student engagement with feedback at the program level using digital tools. So I'm based in the UK at Durham. So some word will be specific to the UK, but I'll try to explain. Okay, so before I start, I would like you to use the chat, and more specifically the emoticon, to let me know how confident you are that your students engage actively with their feedback. So that they read their feedback, that they understand their feedback, or that they use it for their next submission. Thank you, Matthew, for this crying emoticon. Come on, just go for it. We've got some mixed reactions, so sad or completely unknown. We've got some confidence that they don't read their feedback, so that's how I feel as well. So I'm not going to wait for too long because I've got quite a lot to say. I'm personally not confident that they read their feedback, that they engage with it, and that they use it. So that's why we are doing this project. So lately, in the last few decades, educators have invested time and effort to improve assessment and feedback practice. However, when we look at student evaluation, so here it's the UK one, NSS, the score for assessment and feedback doesn't improve much. It can sometimes, but not a lot. And there is really a big difference with the investment of time and effort that we put into it and the results that we get. At the same time, there is a clear move from assessment of learning toward assessment for learning. And at least in the UK, at Durham, we really try to provide opportunities for feedback to our students, so formal and informal, to allow them to develop as self-assessor and to develop self-regulated learning. But assessment for learning can only succeed if our students respond to their feedback. And that means that feedback should be used to support learning as a whole and not for one single task, not for a single assessment. So I don't know if you guys are using Turnitin, but here I'm showing you a screenshot. And when we use Turnitin in our virtual learning environment, we can see if the students have looked at their feedback. So here you can see some green eyes and some closed eyes. So the closed eyes are where students have not even opened their feedback. So that's really sad because we spend so long to provide some good quality feedback. So this project, seek to support students to become active receivers of their feedback by using a digital portfolio that we've called the Student Feedback Journal. And the idea is that they will use it toward their full degree to record and reflect on their feedback. By using this portfolio, they can collect everywhere in the same place. So with the virtual learning environment that we are using at Durham, students have different modules or courses where they will have different assessment, and that's where they will find their different feedback. So it's pretty difficult for them to find their feedback, and we want to give them an opportunity to have all of their feedback in one single place. Okay, so this student feedback journal, so it's not new. It has already been used, something similar at least, and it has been used in the UK by Naomi Winston, and it has worked really well. And some studies have also shown that by reflecting on their feedback during first year, and that's really key here, first year, the student can really improve feedback literacy. So what I will do now is to do a presentation, a walkthrough of the tool that we have developed. And I've got many screenshots to do that, but there is also a short recording that you can access here via this QR code or by using the link, but you may want to do that later. I will take you through all of the screenshots now. So for this tool, we are using PebblePad. I'm not going to lie, we are using it because there is a push in our institution to use it, but it's not too bad, and it's actually doing the job that we would like the tool to do. So with PebblePad, you can have different pages, and on those pages, you can have videos or you can use the different tools provided by PebblePad. Students can also access the content by clicking on the navigation menu where they can see all of the pages here on the side. So when the students arrive on the tool, they arrive on this page, which is called My Feedback Journal, where we explain what this tool is about and how useful it's going to be. The next page is to introduce them to research that we've already done on the topic. So on the topic of formative, summative, feedback, self-feedback, and it's some work that I've done at Durham with the same student doing the same degree. So it helps students when it's really what they are doing themselves. So we've got some work on formative engagement, some work on self and peer feedback. Then the students are directed to some how-to guides. So for this project, we've been lucky enough to have some funding from Durham University. And we've got 2 student interns currently, well, they're going to start year 3 in a few weeks' time. And they've been helping us develop the tool and with the pilot study we've done. So they've recorded some guide where they take the students through how to use the journal itself. So here we've got the how to use the feedback journal. The next one is how to make an entry, how to reflect on feedback, and how to share the journal. So the idea is that students will share with their academic advisor where they can discuss even more the feedback they receive to reflect even more. Then we've got a page where students can give some information about themselves, and it's quite useful if they share with their academic advisor I personally have currently 50 academic advisors. So if they just provide their name, it's a bit difficult for me to know who they are. So the more information they provide, the easier it is for me to advise them. Then we've got the next page, which is the feedback and academic journey. So the plan with this page was to provide somewhere where students can record their grade, but also have all of their feedback. Oh, sorry, I wasn't showing the screenshot for this one. All of their feedback collated in one page. A blog page where students can have any notes that they think they might be relevant. And finally, we've got the pages of the journal. So everything I've shown before is sort of static within the journal, but then we can have this workbook that gets populated when the student make an entry. And we've got the different years here and a page for generative AI. I'll come back on that, but the idea was for students to, as they start using generative AI, to have everything in a single place as well. Okay, so to use it, the student basically make an entry. So they complete a form that is separate to this journal or workbook. And assuming they tag with the correct year, it will populate this page here. So here we can see that we have two submissions. One is molecular and cells formative, and the other one is a practical report. But the student complete that separately, and then it appears here. So it's all in the same journal. So to make an entry, so same short recording, but I will take you through the screenshot now. They open this log form, and here they are prompted to provide some information. So they give a title to the page. They provide information for the year of study, the name of the module, the type of feedback. So we've provided some options. So it can be formative, summative, self-feedback, peer feedback, or it can be something else. Students don't always realize, but there is a lot of opportunities for feedback. It can be in an email sent to the whole class. It can be during a lecture, or students can generate it themselves by using generative AI, by example. So we really want them to understand that, and that's why we've provided all of those options. We then ask them to provide the name of the task, and then they get an opportunity to upload their work or to copy paste their work, and to do the same with the feedback they receive. To go further and to really make sure that they do engage with their feedback in this form, we've initially asked them to categorize their feedback, asking for positive and negative. That's something that we have removed. And if I'm honest, I've removed it because I'm not so sure that all of my colleagues always provide something positive when they provide their feedback. So I didn't really want to highlight that. And then we ask the student for some self-reflection on their feedback to make sure that they engage with it. The other way that students can, so then the students are asked to tag their form, and they select the year. So here I'm going to select year 1, and by doing that, it feeds into the journal, the workbook, and it's going to make an entry here that is called formative 3. So it's really two separate things. One is the making an entry, and the other one is having it all in one single place in the journal. I think next I'm going to come back on this feedback. Oh no, I'm still on using generative AI. So we've done the same with generative AI, as I said, because we wanted students to tag every time they use it. So far, we have not used generative AI much. We have not used generative, I'm being distracted by the chat now, generative AI much, and it was really confusing for the student, but I will come back on that as well. So the other page that we had for self-reflection was this page called Feedback and Academic Journey, where first students can record their grade, and here they've got this table where they can collate all of their feedback in one place. They can also provide a link to the form, so it's not automatic as in the year 1 to 4 pages, but they can still have it in one page. And the idea was that some students would prefer to make an entry in the log, or maybe some will prefer to do it here. So for access, our plan is to use our virtual learning environment, which is Blackboard Learn Ultra. And that's exactly what we've done with the pilot, where we've created this learning module where the students have everything related to this feedback journal. So explanation of the pilot, a link to access the workbook, videos that our students have done, to access, to record, and a link to the log page. So it's all there and they've got access to it, at least for the first year in their learning environment. So for this project, we've developed a tool. So I've developed this tool in collaboration with our Learning and Teaching Center. We also had 2 interns who have helped us to develop it, to create the videos, and to explain it to their peers. For this pilot phase, we had 7 participants, all at the end of level 2. And that's quite important because that means that they may have already engaged or find ways to engage with their feedback. We've sent them all a survey after asking them to make at least 5 entries. We've asked them about current activity, how they use feedback, how easy the tool was to use, how they engage with feedback, and then we've run some focus group to run with them possible improvement that we could do. So all of our participants, by the end of level 2, had found a way to record their feedback. And here, I'm really saying record feedback, so they are able to get their feedback and put it somewhere. Now, when asked about reflecting on feedback, they don't really reflect on their feedback. They said that they look at it quickly before the next submission, but they don't really reflect. Now, I need to explain to you that I'm teaching in bioscience, and us science people, we're quite scared of the word reflect, and we don't really want to reflect on our work. That's not what we do in science at all. So this process of reflection, even though the students are able to do it and can sometimes do, they don't always recognize that they are doing it. And that's a clear opportunity here to help them engage with their feedback. So when asked about the tool, so the more you go on the left side, red, it's agree. The more you go on the right, blue side, it's disagree. When we've asked about how they liked it, they find it pretty easy to use, easy to access. They've quite liked the guidance provided by our students. They've sort of find it useful when reflecting, but I'm unsure if they really understand what reflecting on feedback means. But when asked if they are likely to use it again, well, they're not really likely to use it again because they already have their own way of recording their own feedback. I think I'm going to go over by 2 minutes. We've asked them their view on the tool and the process, if it was useful or not. And all of them said that it was a bit tedious, time-consuming, a lot of work. But bear in mind that we asked them to do it at the end of level 2 in one go. So it took time for them to do it. That's not what we want to do. We want them to do it as they go. However, they've quite enjoyed it and they've thought it was quite nice to have it all collated in one place. They've liked the idea and it was quite useful. So time consuming if they do it in one go, but they quite enjoy the process of doing it, or the result at least. Again, they're not really likely to continue to do it because they already have their own way. So how can we improve that? So the timing to introduce the tool will be key to success. So we're going to do it in induction week via our academic induction course, where students will be explained the value of feedback, the value of the journal, and how to use it. And they will actually be prompted to make an entry in week 1. The blog page was very confusing, so we're going to rename it My Personal Note, so it's more clear for the student and they may use it or not. The students find it very confusing to have the feedback log where they make an entry and the feedback and academic page. So we were actually not sure if we needed to have both of them because the information there are the same. So we've changed the both of them and we've made our feedback form a lot shorter. So now they just provide the title that has everything, the year, the module, the assessment. They still have the type of feedback. They're still able to upload their work and the feedback they receive. But now we ask them to interpret their feedback. So I've just said, oh, they're a bit unsure about reflecting. So we've tried to remove it completely from the journal. We try to remove this word of reflection, reflective feedback. And here we ask them to use their own word to say how they could improve or what went well. And we are asking them some question. What went well? How did you approach the task? And we really want them to do this effort of using their own words so it speaks to them. I'm going to try to finish very shortly now. And I'll come back on this slide later. Our page that had the grade and all of the feedback collated has changed to 2 pages, one just with the grade, with a reminder that the grades are only final after the board of examiner. And instead of having all of the feedback collated that we had before, we are now calling it my checklist before submission. And here we've already provided some guidance of what they should check before they submit something. So I've answered all of the components, I've provided suitable title, I've provided correct reference, and then the student can remove and add to it. So we're providing guidance on how to add to this. But what can they add? Well, they can use this interpretation of feedback and they're actually prompted to add it to their before submission checklist. So hopefully by linking the two, they will collate their useful feedback so they can really use it. We need to clarify the use of generative AI, but there is another project that's going to start next year with that. I don't want to say too much on that. And finally, students have asked for some guidance on how to reflect on feedback, and we're not going to have a video called how to reflect on feedback, but we're going to ask our intern to record a discussion where they discuss how they use themselves, their feedback for future assessment. Okay, so we're going to launch that next academic year, which is starting in a few weeks. We're going to have to communicate a lot with the students. So I like to have posters of the work so the student can see it. So I may do a poster on this one. It's going to be a group effort. Academic advisor, lecturer, module leader. We all need to do it all together because if not, it's not going to work at the program level. And we need to continue to increase opportunities for students to develop self-feedback abilities. But what we need to do is to be explicit about feedback opportunity. And it might be that we need to send an email to students after a lecture saying, hey, by the way, when I've said that, it was an opportunity for feedback. Please make an entry in your journal. This is my final slide. I want to thank my intern, my collaborator, the pilot participant, Durham University, yourself for listening. And if you have any comment, you can use the chat, you can drop me an email, or here there is a link for a form to complete as well. Sorry it took me so long.
Thank you, Mathilde. We got just a very quick question from Chris. Is just saying it was just asking about PebblePad, if you can see in the chat, and he was just sort of mentioning that is pushed at institutional level, right?
So we currently have PebblePad in my institution, which is really expensive, PebblePad. And basically, if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. So when I was looking at tools to use, I've been told, hey, why don't you use PebblePad? I quite like it, so I'm not too worried about it. But if I start now, I need to be sure that my student can use it for their full degree, because that's the plan, that's what we want. We really want to have a program degree approach there. But yeah, there is a push currently.
Yeah, lovely. So I will suggest that we move on with Katie's presentation, and then we can have a further chat at the end of the session. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to be talking about reinvesting in authentic assessment as a response to generative AI. I work at the University of Bristol in their International Foundation program. That's what I'm going to be talking about today, where we have 500 students, primarily from China and the Middle East. They have upper intermediate to advanced levels English, so B2 to C1 on the Common European Framework of Reference. They're pre-undergraduate students, and they're preparing for undergraduate student study at the University of Bristol in a variety of degrees. So before I dig into what AI misuse looked like in our program, I'm going to give you a bit of what our units are. So students take 2 English for academic purposes classes, and then they take 2 or 3 subject units, depending on their future degree of study. So that could be the first 2, depending on their language proficiency. So they would take text response and academic writing, and then they might take Foundations of Finance and Economics or Introduction to Mathematics. But it means that students who are taking these English for academic purposes classes are taking a whole range of subject units. So 13 different combinations, and I manage the assessments and for all of these units, the design, the quality of those assessments, and any of the academic integrity issues that arise. As you might imagine, that last piece has taken a larger part of my role in the last year. Our policy about AI actually predates the mass adoption of generative AI. We had an online translation policy at the start of the 2022-2023 school year, and it was that students were permitted to use online translation for generating words and phrases up to the sentence level. In January, we put in the word AI but had the same sort of policy. So I think the messaging for students was streamlined in that way. And for any breaches, we follow the university's contract cheating regulations. So how do we identify these possible breaches? So in early 2023, when it was first introduced, the first question teachers were asking me that was coming up was, is flawless language non-human? And so some of our initial accusations were around language level, and some of our best students were flagged. And those issues were spotted because our process isn't just about that initial flagging, but past work is scrutinized. The academic integrity officer has an interview with the student. We do use the turn-in AI detection tool. So we have all of these different points that we're looking at. Last in 22-23, we also had more non-anonymous marking in our English for academic purposes classes because we have continuous assessment. And as Dawson and others have pointed out, we're using a model, maybe like the Swiss cheese model, where we have some things that are happening in class, some things that are happening outside of class. Together, if the teacher knows the student, they can weave all of that information together and know if it's the student's work. So our process is complex, using tools, using knowledge of students, and luckily having that continuous assessment makes it a bit easier. So in 22-23, there was this question of, are students who have lower English level more likely to have misconduct? And we have students at the B2 level, which is the lower of these two. They did have more misconduct, but when you actually look at the statistics, it's not significantly more. So this is just, we have more of them, they have more cases, but it's not a significant difference. What's also interesting is people were concerned that this was just happening in their English classes. But when we looked at it across units that had some misconduct, AI misconduct reported, it was actually a remarkable similar proportion of those units. So we can see this is real data. I haven't put the numbers on, but a remarkably consistent proportion of students in those units. But if we wanted to reduce the caseload, it became pretty clear that there was one unit we had to look at, and that was the academic writing unit. That's because it's those B2 level students, and it's EAP that has the English for Academic Purposes that has more assessments. So that was the unit we really needed to target. And I'm going to be talking about two changes today to make assessments more engaging and authentic. And we wanted to start there because, as Chomsky had pointed out, that misusing AI is sort of plagiarism and apathy.
Sorry, Katie. We got some comments in the chat asking whether the slides are moving. Are you okay moving the slides?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I think they weren't. Okay.
Lovely.
Great. Yes, so we have the language level slide. They're remarkably similar. Yes, okay. Academic writing. Now we're back. Okay. As Chomsky said, misusing AI is plagiarism and apathy. And I was hearing that when I was meeting with the students who were suspected of misconduct, that there was a fair amount of apathy around the assessments. Why am I doing this? Why do I care? Why does it matter that I've generated too much content in this particular assignment? So we wanted to focus on engagement, on getting students to care about their learning. And we were thinking of engagement not as a personal characteristic, as Kyle points out, but as made up of these different elements of agency, of behavior. How much time and effort are they putting into their studies, into cognitive engagement? How deeply are they learning and focusing? And on emotional engagement, how interested and enthused are they? And realizing that student engagement is then, it's influenced by the cultural environment, by our policies, by their relationships with their teachers. And so making sure that we're looking at that whole system. And even then, their engagement is situated in specific activities, as Alfonso and Tapio mentioned. And that engagement is in some ways to me related to authentic assessment, which requires students to use the same competencies or combinations. This is the definition we're using. Knowledge and skills and attitudes that they need to apply in the criterion situation in future life. So we want them to see the connection to what they're doing now to their future life. Not just the world of work. In an international foundation program, it makes a lot of sense to have the year one experience in undergrad. That's authentic to them. That's what they're aiming for. That's their future world. And also being citizens of Bristol and of our community here. So authenticity can be promoted through a genuine dialogue about the different purposes. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? And Murdoch and Anderman have these 3 questions that they ask students. So why am I doing this is one of them, and that's what students ask before they cheat. But authenticity is not an integrity panacea, as Al-Jawahi recently wrote. If we look at Ellis's 2020 study, we can see different elements of authenticity and how they related to contract cheating, outsourcing to SA mills. And we can see that there isn't a clear answer, but maybe focusing on the idea of impact and social elements of our assessments might be effective. So our goal was to create more engaging and authentic assessments, to integrate assessment tasks more with future studies, to have more authentic real-world purposes for the tasks, to increase the social elements of the task, and to reduce misconduct. We evaluated those changes looking at the misconduct case numbers, doing a student survey, which is based off the Afonso Tapio situated engagement. So 2 questions are related to each part of engagement. And then also asking about the usefulness and interest of the assessments, transferability, and the amount of imagined readers. I also had a very small focus group with 2 students and looked at some other elements. So the first change is through the situation, problem, solution, and evaluation task. And in this, it used to be, choose a problem, find a solution, write about it. But we asked people to explore a real life problem in the Bristol area and to identify a solution and write a report for the local councillors. And one of the interesting parts is they had to use data from the Bristol Quality of Life. We have a wonderful open database around all sorts of quality of life indicators in Bristol. So having people be able to have a real life experience thinking that their traffic intersection is dangerous, and then being able to look at the data, think about, is that true, and then write about possible solutions. And there are so many different ways they could explore it. It was really this rich data set. When we looked at the student survey about this and the focus group, we can see that they were engaged. They enjoyed the idea of being able to choose the topic, having that agency even within the constraints of being about Bristol using the open data source. They did like, but you can see they were the second part. I've flipped all the negative ones. So that they would have liked to have even more choice around some of those constraints, but we thought that was important. Behavioral engagement, students did work hard on this task, and this student in the focus group talked about it being his very first time checking a book out from the library. He found this book on racism in Bristol. He had a difficult time finding it in the library, getting to the library, but then he read it cover to cover, and just that was a completely new thing for him, and you could see how that behavior will be useful in the future in his studies. Cognitive and emotional engagement in the task. This was also interesting. You see this quote from the student. So we see the student wrote about transgender discrimination on the bus system. And it started from this personal interest, personal experience with the bus system and feeling like it wasn't great. And then looking at the data to see, do other people feel that way? Seeing something interesting happening with dissatisfaction with transgender people in the bus system, and then looking into that. So we can see here now the survey data where we see cognitive engagement for the first 2 and emotional engagement for the second 2. So people were interested and engaged in this task. There was some question about just whether our social science and law students were interested in this, but it was actually interesting across the different pathways and pretty similar levels. So the STEM students, the students who were studying arts and humanities, there was something in it for everyone because they could explore the issues through these different lenses. But there were also barriers to engagement, like having too many assessments and the time log, which we know can lead to misconduct. So our goals were to increase engagement, to have more of an authentic real-world purpose, and to reduce misconduct. We don't have a good comparison to the previous year. I've put up here on the left, you see the overall rate of misconduct for these students in similar students in 2022, 23, and then we have on the right the misconduct on that task. It is significantly smaller, but I think it's a difficult comparison to make. So let's see if we can do something better. That brings me to my second change, where we're talking about academic writing, that same unit, but the cause and effect essay. And this one, we ended up having two groups. One is a quasi-control, the STEM students, where we couldn't make very many changes to that task, where the students still had a fairly open task, write about the causes and effect of something related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it was pretty broad. There wasn't a real purpose. We tried to make it a little bit better. It was tied to another project, a group project they were doing in another class. They were given a source and they were told, this is going to help with the project you're going to do in the future. And you should probably share it with your teammates in the other group. The economics, finance, management, arts, social science, law, and humanities students, they had a more integrated task, which we were hoping would be more engaging. So they had more specific ties to their subject unit content, one source from their subject unit, and they were told that I asked their subject tutors to say, what's the key cause and effect relationship in week 1 through 6 in your unit? And then students were going to learn about that concept, write about that concept, and then share it with their classmates. So the premise was that this was about revising for their subject unit, and that was really going to help them. Here's an example of the cause and effect essay for the economics, finance, and management students. What are the effects of having a full view of cash flow instead of just profits? So you can imagine this is a key concept for that accounting unit. Our expected changes is going to make it more integrated in the non-STEM, have that authentic, being studying for them, preparing for their UG studies is authentic, and increase audience. They're going to share it with their classmates. Here we can see their engagement, and you can see that the first two about autonomy, even though the non-STEM students had those key concepts chosen by their subject units, there was still some choice there. They were slightly more, felt like they had more autonomy. Then we have behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, and emotional engagement. And we see two statistically significant differences, one around the STEM students discussing the task, and that had to do with it being tied to that group project they were doing. And then we also see a difference in the last one, where students said, I had a good time while writing my cause and effect essay. And it was a challenge that I liked to overcome. That the students who were writing about something more related to their future studies, more tied to what they were doing, really felt that emotional engagement interest. The subject tutors, so for example, on that economics and finance and management unit, they appreciated that students could grapple with the conceptual issues rather than the procedural knowledge. So that cognitive engagement that they were showing with this task. The non-STEM students also ranked it more as being more useful. The STEM and non-STEM students rated it similarly for transferability of language and content. So they did still feel like they learned something. And as far as having an audience for the task, that didn't really work out in the way the task was designed. So less than 1% of the students actually posted anything on a discussion board. The survey data showed that they weren't imagining their subject tutor reading it. They weren't imagining more readers for the STEM versus non-STEM. So when we designed the task, we thought there was more audience. Maybe that didn't happen. When we look at the misconduct data, we can see a trend starting to show where we have less misconduct for those more for the non-STEM students who had that task that was more integrated. Now, I think this is just a trend. It's one case away from being statistically significant, so it's not there. And I think even then, the comparison of STEM versus non-STEM is slightly problematic. So we don't have the data yet to make a strong case that assessment should be authentic and engaging, and that's going to reduce misconduct. But I think what we can see is no matter what, this is the right direction for our program to be going in, because it centers students and what they care about. It gives them an opportunity to think about the real world and think about how that relates to what they're doing now in our program. So thank you so much, and I guess I'll hand it back over for questions.
Thank you very much, Katie. And we had positive comments in the chat about the design of your research. I would like to invite questions in the chat for both presenters, and we can pick it from there and direct them to the right presenter. Pardon me, probably need another coffee. My voice is already going. I had a question for Mathilde, and obviously your project is like about to be launched. I was wondering whether you are set up an evaluation and research dimension over this project, aside from the very good practice that you design on PebblePad, and possibly for Katie. Yeah, I was wondering whether you're looking into collecting data from different codes to sort of build more of a capacity to actually perform that research. Mathilde, would you like to add a few words about this?
Yes, of course. So our initial plan was to launch everything last academic year, but then we didn't want to do it in a rush. So that's why we've delayed everything. And we wanted to have this pilot group to make sure that we were not doing any mistakes. When we share the journal with the student, it becomes static. We can't make any edits into it. So they're going to get it and they're going to have to use it as it is for their full degree. So we're going to check usage after the end of term 1 to see if they're using it or not. And then we're going to have different surveys going on at the end of each year, so we can improve for the next cohort coming and see how it goes. So yeah, we do plan to assess it quite a lot over the next 3 to 5 years, I will say, to see how it goes.
Katie, would you like to follow up with your own plans? You were already saying something at the end of your presentation.
Yes, I think this is definitely going to be an ongoing project. I think we will always struggle with comparing year to year data because our student cohorts are different and
yes,
and all the different dynamics. But I think within a year, that can be something where if we have continuous assessment, maybe there are pieces to that. And I'd love to do more of the focus groups because they weren't well attended, but the data was so rich in those conversations. I also see a question in a chat about using ChatGPT, and
yes,
one of the things we've been looking at is the principles that Dawson set out. I think it's in a 2020 article and one of them is that students shouldn't be using AI until or cognitively offloading tasks until they have mastered them themselves. And so that's where we're in this interesting position in an international foundation program where it's at a level where they haven't mastered some of the things yet, so it's not appropriate for them to be using AI in certain ways yet. So I think in some ways we take a different approach than hopefully what will be happening in some of the year one things. But it has meant that we've experimented with AI doing abstracts for things they've written, for example. So we're not having students write those.
It's very interesting that talking about portfolios and the opportunity to reflect, as well as the reflective task that you had, Katie. It's a great opportunity to actually train the students to think about what AI does and how it can be used in an appropriate way. So that's what we've done at UEA. We just sort of have red, amber, and green rag activities that the students can engage with. But yeah, extremely interesting. Thank you so much. Any other questions from our audience? I see that.
I just want to point out, Jacqueline asked one about, again, back to sort of the Gen AI stuff. Have you been thinking about letting students work together with AI to make their work richer? I guess that's sort of similar along the lines, and I can understand the apprehension of if they haven't mastered it yet. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also opportunities to use AI to look as part of the reflection process, I think, as Fabio was saying, so that students can see what they've done, they can see what AI's done. If they understand what good looks like, then they can have a real comparison of what those two are. So we've done a bit of that, and I think that's something we'll explore more of.
I'm just going to pick up on what the good looks like. Do you mean, is that what the Gen AI creates, is what good looks like, or perhaps not?
No, I think that what good looks like, using the idea of evaluative judgment and students being able to make those evaluative judgments. So what good looks like is a bit more complicated than AI. One of the things we've done, for example, is summary writing, where generative AI, it can really help students in some of their study skills if they can use AI to summarize things. But they also have to recognize that it isn't always great. And so comparing the summaries they write with the summary from ChatGPT, then we can see, okay, it missed maybe some key points, or maybe it didn't. And having that reflection on what good would be, and then what AI has produced and what they've produced can be really fruitful.
I personally, I think you're getting to the nut of the problem there, is that it's the discussion from two examples to sit around that. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity to increase students' AI literacy, in that we know that large language models don't always produce the truth. They can hallucinate falsehoods. I think that's a good opportunity to sort of sneak that in there as well as part of the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just found really interesting. Obviously, this was one example of one of the possible things that you can do, but you were talking about students focusing on transgender communities on buses, and it's interesting that, I mean, very often see students say, "Oh, I belong to a certain group, therefore I'm going to write about this issue," but this student was actually focusing on statistical, sort of observation that they were making. And one of the interesting thing about AI is that you can actually implement all these sort of EDI considerations, because you can ask students to criticize to which extent AI is not inclusive and it speaks with the loudest voice. So I thought that would be a brilliant application. It was really, really interesting to see that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
We are 4 minutes away from 9 a.m., at least in the UK. So if there are not any other burning questions, I would like to thank Matthew once again for having us co-presenting, co-leading this this session, and I will leave him to give the final instructions about what's going to happen with this session and the next sessions.
Sorry, my internet is extremely poor at the moment because we've got wild weather here. So if I drop off, just please excuse me. Okay, so thanks very much for coming. Brilliant, Katie and Mathilde. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. Now, up next month in the Transforming Assessment series, funnily enough, it's generative AI again. It just keeps coming up. I promise we will have sessions on things other than Gen AI at some point. I particularly want a session on programmatic assessment outside of medicine. So if you know anybody, hint, hint, give me a call. So 2nd of October, how to ensure robust assessment in the light of generative AI. Please go to our website. You can sign up for that session. As I mentioned, this material all being recorded. I will stick it on our website very shortly, along with a copy of the slides and the text. So thank you very much, folks. Look forward to you again in about a month's. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Mathilde, for your great contributions today. Let me just stop the recording.